Hello friends. Today I will explain an Indonesian folklore horror film, Trinil Kembalikan Tubuhku, which means Trinil give me back my body. So, without further delay, let's jump straight into the video. The story begins with three workers working at a tea plantation factory. This factory belonged to the Sander family, which William Sander was running until his sudden death from a heart attack. Now, the responsibility of running the factory has fallen on his daughter Rara, who owns it. Anyway, we see these three workers sitting at the factory, discussing the death of a colleague, Sagi. They talk about how Sagi also suddenly died from a heart attack. Some people believe that Sagi's death occurred during sleep paralysis, and that before dying, he had seen Madam Ayu walking around the factory. Ayu was William's wife and Rara's mother, who had been missing since William's death. No one knows where Ayu is now or whether she is alive. No one knows anything. The three workers continue discussing these matters and then go to sleep. Later, one of the workers, Tagar, is shown stumbling towards sleep in a drunken state when he suddenly hears voices. When Tagar opens his eyes, he sees a terrifying spirit in front of him, one that has only a head and is floating in the air. The spirit moves towards Tagar, and in fear, he tries to run away. But at that moment, a rope ties around his neck and pulls him up to the ceiling, strangling him to death. This marks the beginning of the main movie. In the beginning, we are shown several newspaper clippings revealing that more than 5 workers have died mysteriously at the plantation, and the real cause of their deaths is still unknown. Moving on, we see Rara returning home with her husband, Sultan. Their house is near the factory, and they are just back from their honeymoon. This implies that her parents have passed away, yet Rara couldn't even take time off from her honeymoon. At this time, the house caretaker, Joku, picks them up and tells them some strange things happening at the factory. Additionally, there has been a significant decrease in tea production, resulting in heavy losses. They arrive home, and that night, while Rara and Sultan are sleeping, Rara begins to experience sleep paralysis, which seems like a spirit possesses her. Seeing this, Sultan gets frightened and screams for Joku to come quickly. Joku runs to their room with a glass of water, prays over it, and sprinkles it on Rara, causing her to recover immediately. However, Rara starts shouting at Joku, asking, "What are you doing in my room?" because she doesn't remember anything that happened. Another similar incident happens the following day. This time Sultan sees a headless spirit outside the window, and Rara starts floating in the air as if possessed. Joku arrives and takes control of the situation. But then Rara starts scolding him again for coming into her room, as she doesn't remember anything. This makes the Sultan realize that there is the shadow of a terrifying spirit in their house. During this time, he finds out from a newspaper about an exorcist named Yusuf, who, surprisingly, was his old school friend. The next day, Sultan visits Yusuf's clinic. Yusuf, a psychiatrist, has a special interest in supernatural and paranormal cases, so he is also an expert in exorcism. Sultan tells Yusuf about his wife's possessions, and the very next day, Yusuf comes and places a glass of water in their bedroom. He had mixed salt in the water, and before leaving, he told the Sultan that if any spirit were present, the water would turn black. Otherwise, the water would remain clear. On the other hand, Rara finds all these ghost-related discussions absurd, but she gets her answer that very night. While having dinner with her husband, a spirit's head suddenly appears on the table, spinning on its own and saying, "Trinil." We will find out what this means later. Upon seeing this, Sultan faints right there. The next day, we notice that Yusuf checks on Sultan's health and notices that the glass of water has completely turned black, indicating a terrifying spirit's presence. Rara, who hadn't believed in any of this, now agrees that the spirit is accurate, as she had seen it with her own eyes. She asks Yusuf to find a solution and tells him not to go into her father's private room during his investigation. This seems odd to Yusuf, who begins to suspect that Rara and Sultan are hiding something. Later, through a book on demonic spirits and demons, Yusuf discovers that the spirit troubling them is named Koyang. He informs Rara and Sultan that Koyang comes to humans for two reasons: eternal life, i.e., to remain spiritually alive after death. Koyang is not a demon, but the spirit of a witch who practices black magic and hunts children to increase her power. The second reason is that she wants her body back. Yusuf explains that when a person dies a painful death, such as having their head chopped off, their spirit will return and wander. Meanwhile, the spirit continues to torment them, and Yusuf decides to sneak into William's room, thinking he might discover the truth about the spirit there, as all the connections seem to point to that room. The next day, Yusuf sneaks in and, surprisingly, finds no picture of Rara in William's room. Around the same time, the workers in the factory find the dead body of Tagar, who had been hanged and killed by the spirit earlier. Upon seeing this, no worker is willing to work in the factory anymore, and by the end of the day, almost all the workers leave the factory. Joku then informs Rara and Sultan that the workers abandoned the factory due to the fear of the spirit. After this, Yusuf tries to find out whose spirit it is, and that very night, he gets an answer. That night, Rara's other servant, Jarwo, comes to Yusuf and takes him to a woman named Widow, Ayu's mother, i.e., Rara's grandmother. There, Yusuf learns that the spirit haunting them is none other than Ayu's, William's wife and Rara's mother. Widow then tells Yusuf the entire story of Ayu. Ayu was a greedy woman from childhood who always wished to become rich. She constantly desired to marry a wealthy man and would go to any extent to achieve that. But the question was, why would a wealthy man choose Ayu? To answer this, she had to become beautiful. So Ayu went to a shaman who practiced black magic and learned the craft of black magic herself. She performed some specific rituals and gave her soul to the devil in exchange for beauty. As Ayu grew older, she became even more beautiful, and all the men in the city became infatuated with her. One day, William saw Ayu and instantly fell in love with her. They got married, and later, Rara was born. She was initially named Trinil in her childhood. You may also remember that Ayu's spirit had called her Trinil, but from that very moment, Ayu had developed a strong dislike for her daughter, Rara. By then, Ayu had become a demon in both her heart and mind, and all she wanted was for William to love her and spend all his money on her, not love anyone else, not even their daughter. This is why Ayu hated Rara from childhood. The hatred was so intense that she even tried to kill Rara. When William found out about this, he transferred all his property to Rara on her 18th birthday, sending Ayu into a rage. She confronted William, saying, "I only married you for your money, and I would do anything to get it." Well, upon hearing this, William suffered a heart attack and fell ill from that day onward. After that, Ayu's evil intentions began to surface for everyone to see. First, she threatened to kill Rara to force William to sign the property papers, and one night, right in front of William, Ayu became intimate with William's male nurse. This shock caused William to die instantly on the spot. The shocking part was that Sultan was the male nurse, the same Sultan now Rara's husband, and Ayu had forced him to do this. At this point, Rara storms into the room and, in her fury, decapitates Ayu with a large knife, severing her mother's head. After this, the Sultan begins begging for forgiveness, and Rara only agrees to forgive him on one condition: if the Sultan marries her. After this, Sultan and Rara marry, though it is not clearly explained why Rara did this. Regardless, the two of them buried Ayu's body in a corner of the factory, keeping the head separate. Later, the head was burned, and from that moment on, Ayu's curse seemed to hang over the factory. This was around the time when they had gone on their honeymoon, and it was at this moment that Ayu's head, or perhaps her demonic form, began killing the workers to destroy the factory and its business. When this truth comes to light in front of Yusuf, he begins to leave, but then an extremely shocking scene unfolds. Sultan suddenly attacks his friend Yusuf from behind and decapitates him with a single strike, saying, "You shouldn't have known this much truth." Afterward, Sultan tells Jaru to bury Yusuf's dead body and then leaves for the factory, where he joins Ayu's headless skeleton with her body. Where did Sultan get all this information from? In reality, the Sultan secretly followed Yusuf and overheard the conversation between Widow and Yusuf. It was revealed through that Ayu's spirit would only find peace when her head was reunited with her body. Since Ayu was killed at precisely 2 a.m., her body and head needed to be joined at that precise time. Although this ritual would bring temporary peace to Ayu's spirit, one night she attacks Rara and Sultan again, severely injuring Sultan. However, before she can harm Rara, Joko arrives with a priest and several people who manage to save Rara. Afterward, Rara has a vision in which her father tells her to forgive her mother and show her the same respect she gave him. Upon hearing this, Rara forgives Ayu. In the next scene, we see that Rara has built a grave for her mother, Ayu, near William's grave, where she finally gives her mother the respect every daughter should. After this, Rara visits her grandmother, Widow, and begins living with her. As the film ends, we see a hand of a spirit emerging from the ground in front of their house. It might be Yusuf's spirit, which has now returned to a new form. I hope you enjoyed the movie explanation. I'll see you all in the next video.